Throughout history, some of the world's most mysterious books have vanished without explanation, without a trace. These weren't ordinary texts. They were whispered about, hidden, sometimes destroyed, but always for a reason. Some held forbidden knowledge. Others were linked to strange events, secret societies, or sudden disappearances. What power did they contain? Who wanted them gone? All that remains are fragments, rumors, letters, a missing page here or there. But the questions endure. Join us as we uncover the lost manuscripts that were never meant to be found and the chilling stories they left behind. The Gospel of Pilate, the lost testament of a Roman governor. The year was 36 CE. In the scorched province of Judea, under the iron shadow of the Roman Empire, Pontius Pilate returned to Caesarea with something unexpected. A document, written in his own hand, sealed with the mark of the governor, hidden in a carved cedar box. It was not addressed to the Senate, not meant for Tiberius. It was not a report, nor a proclamation. It was something else entirely, a testimony, a confession, a record of something that refused to remain buried beneath stone and politics. No church would ever recognize it. No gospel canon would claim it. And yet, the story of this mysterious manuscript, what some would come to call the Gospel of Pilate, has lingered like a shadow at the edges of faith and empire. Somewhere beyond the ruins of Caesarea Maritima, where the sea carves away the remnants of Roman stone, a legend whispers through archives and oral traditions. Not a gospel penned by apostles, not by saints or scribes, but by the man who, with a single gesture, sentenced Jesus of Nazareth to die. Pontius Pilate, a name etched into the Nicene Creed, recited for centuries across churches, immortalized, and yet strangely voiceless. What if that silence was not the absence of testimony but its suppression? The trail begins in the final year of Pilate's rule. His tenure in Judea, nearly a decade, had been defined by tension. The province was a crucible, volatile, deeply religious, politically unstable. Pilate, a Roman of equestrian rank, was not known for sensitivity. He brought imperial standards into Jerusalem, violated Jewish custom, and governed with the calculated force expected of Rome's provincial administrators. But something changed after the crucifixion. Ancient sources, like the historian Eusebius and the philosopher Philo of Alexandria, describe a shift. Within months of the execution of Jesus, Pilate was summoned back to Rome. Officially, he was recalled to answer for a bloody suppression of a Samaritan movement. Unofficially, it was the end of his career. What happened next is uncertain. Some claimed he took his own life. Others suggested he was exiled. A few traditions hold that he disappeared into the mountains of Gaul, a broken man, but in the scattered hints left behind fragments, marginalia, apocryphal texts, a different possibility begins to flicker. That Pilate wrote something, and that someone, somewhere, tried to keep it from the world. In 1842, a French archaeologist working in the ruins near Luxor claimed to have found a scroll within the walls of an abandoned Coptic monastery. The script was Greek, the author's name, Pilatus of Rome. Though dismissed at the time as a forgery, the scroll vanished shortly after its discovery. Witnesses described its tone not as political, but confessional. A man recounting not orders and reports, but dreams. Visions. A presence he could not forget. He allegedly spoke of the day the Nazarene was brought before him, not as a rebel or threat, but as something else. Pilate described being disturbed by the man's silence, by his bearing. One passage, later quoted in a 19th century theological journal, read, "He looked at me not with defiance, but with knowing, as if my judgment was already behind us, as if I were not the arbiter, but the accused." The apocryphal Acts of Pilate, later subsumed into what became known as the Gospel of Nicodemus, bears traces of this myth. Though clearly written centuries after the events, it suggests the enduring fascination with what Pilate may have thought and what he may have written. Some early Christian apologists, including Justin Martyr and Tertullian, insist that official Roman records once contained Pilate's report on Jesus' trial. Whether those documents were factual, embellished, or fictional remains a matter of debate. But one element surfaces again and again: Pilate's wife. In the canonical Gospels, she appears only briefly. She warns him in a dream, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man." In the supposed Gospel of Pilate, this moment is expanded. The dream becomes an omen, and Pilate, despite the theater of hand-washing, feels its weight. In one fragment, reportedly copied from a medieval Italian codex, Pilate writes, "I sought to release him, not from mercy, but from fear, not of the crowd, but of him. He seemed untouched by death, as though it had already passed him by." Whether any of these texts are genuine is almost beside the point. Their existence, serial, rumored or imagined, reveals a cultural and theological anxiety. That the most infamous bureaucrat in Christian history may not have been a villain, that he may have wrestled with something he couldn't name, that he may have tried to explain. In the 4th century, as Christianity moved from persecuted sect to imperial religion, the canon closed. Heretical texts were destroyed, banned, or buried. Some were hidden by monks. Others faded into dust. During this period, any document that framed Roman authority as vulnerable to Jesus' power, especially a governor's confession, would have been politically dangerous. To elevate Pilate's voice would be to humanize empire. And the Church, by then, needed Rome to remain the backdrop of divine victory. Yet even in the darkest corners of ecclesiastical libraries, rumors persisted. The Vatican's Index Librorum Prohibitorum, compiled in the 16th century, lists several epistolae Pilati as apocryphal. In 1957, a Jesuit scholar claimed to have seen a scroll titled Memoranda of Pontius Pilatus in the restricted archives of St. Catherine's Monastery at Sinai. The scroll, he said, was sealed in wax, untranslated, and filed among 4th century Syriac homilies. It has not been seen since. In remote Armenia, high in the monasteries near Lake Van, travelers in the early 20th century recorded a ritual in which monks processed silently with a small cedar box. It was said to contain the judgment of the Roman. They did not open it, they did not speak of it, only that it had come from Jerusalem long ago and was never to be read aloud. Could Pilate have written such a document? He was educated, literate, politically aware. He would have understood the power of record keeping, and he had just witnessed something that shattered categories. A man accused of sedition who spoke of kingdoms not of this world. A crucifixion followed by an eclipse. A tomb that, according to some, did not stay shut. Pilate's final years remained cloaked in silence. His name, fixed forever in the creeds, is not a title of condemnation but a marker. Suffered under Pontius Pilate, it grounds the story of Jesus in history, places the divine within time, within bureaucracy, within empire. But what if Pilate left more than a name? What if, buried beneath the ruins, beneath doctrine and doubt, there remains a voice? A man not seeking redemption, but trying to understand what passed before him. A man who condemned the Christand, then wrote it down. The Gospel of Pilate has never been found, but its absence speaks louder than silence. Not all Gospels were written for salvation. Some were written because a man could no longer bear the weight of memory, and somewhere, perhaps in the sands of Judea or the shadows of a monastic vault, a sealed cedar box waits, and a voice from the edge of empire whispers still. The vanishing of the Sibylline books. Rome, 83 BCE. Thunder cracked over the Capitoline hill as a bolt of lightning struck the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. The temple caught fire. Within hours, flames consumed not only one of the holiest sites in the Roman Republic but something more enigmatic. The Sibylline books. Gone. Vanished into smoke. The loss was not merely symbolic. These were not just scrolls or ceremonial relics. The Sibylline books, or Libri Sibyllini, were prophecy incarnate. Encased in the vaults beneath the Temple of Jupiter, these sacred texts were consulted only during the gravest of crises. Rome did not move armies, enact laws, or navigate omens without them. They were the secret voice of the Republic. Legend traced their origin to a woman cloaked in riddle and fire, the Cumaean Sibyl. She arrived, it is said, during the reign of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome. She carried 9 books and offered them to the king at a staggering price. He refused. She burned 3. The offer remained the same. He refused again. She burned 3 more. Finally, with only 3 remaining, Tarquinius relented, paying the full original price. Those 3 books, the final remnant of an ancient trove, became the Sibylline books guarded from that moment forward beneath the Capitoline. But what did they actually contain? Here, the mystery begins to spiral. The books were written in Greek hexameter, cryptic verse, packed with metaphor and veiled threats. Only the Duumviri Sacris Faciundis, a specially appointed priesthood, could consult them. Their contents were never made public, not in full. Fragments survive only in second-hand accounts. References to foreign cults being introduced, to rituals suddenly mandated by the Senate without explanation. In 399 BCE, Rome was gripped by plague. The Senate, at the priests' urging, called for the introduction of the cult of Apolloan Eastern deity To, the city's pantheon. Why? The Sibylline books. The texts appear to have functioned as a conduit for controlled revelation. Their authority was immense, yet always mediated through intermediaries. In the year 216 BCE, after the catastrophic Roman defeat at Cannae, the books were consulted. The result? The Senate buried alive 2 Gauls and 2 Greeks in the Forum Boreum human sacrifice, an extraordinary event in Roman ritual practice. It was done, reportedly, at the instruction of the books. But who truly interpreted them? And what, exactly, did they read? And then, nearly 4 centuries later, they were gone. The official report attributes their loss to the lightning and fire that consumed the temple. But even at the time, many suspected something stranger. The fire spared the bronze doors of the temple. The altar remained intact. Yet the scrolls sealed in protective stone chests were reduced to ash. Pliny the Elder, writing nearly a century later, expressed doubts, noting that the books had been recently referenced in debates only years before the fire. Cicero too seemed skeptical, remarking in De Divinatione that such oracles must be read with caution, for men interpret mysteries for their own ends. Seneca the Younger, who lived decades later, noted how quickly the Roman elite turned to imitation, filling the void left by the books with supposed new revelations from foreign lands. But even these were kept hidden, filtered, controlled. What few realize is that the Sibylline books did not disappear without replacement. Within a generation, the Roman state quietly began collecting oracular texts from across the Mediterranean, Babylonian tablets, Delphic fragments, even Etruscan entrail reading manuals. These were cobbled together to form a new collection. But scholars disagreed. Did this new corpus contain any part of the originals, or was the reconstruction merely political theatre? In 12 BCE, under Augustus, the newly minted Libri Sibyllini were moved again, this time to the Temple of Apollo Palatinus, directly under imperial oversight. The shift was telling. The prophetic texts, once a tool of the Senate, were now instruments of the emperor. The divine voice had been centralized. Their use, though diminished, continued for centuries. In 363 CE, Emperor Julian, a pagan revivalist, reportedly consulted the Sibylline books before launching his campaign against the Sassanid Empire. The records are unclear on what the texts revealed, but the campaign ended in Julian's death. And then, in the early 5th century CE, they vanished once more. Theodosius II ordered the books destroyed. Christianity had become the empire's religion. Pagan rituals, even state-sanctioned ones, were anathema. And so, the last known repository of Rome's prophetic archive was consigned to oblivion. But fragments keep surfacing. In 1895, a French archaeologist in central Turkey unearthed a marble tablet with carved verses in hexameter similar in form and tone to descriptions of the Sibylline prophecies. Its provenance was unclear, and the text, though evocative, made no direct reference to Rome. Yet linguistic analysis revealed patterns consistent with early Greek prophetic writing: enigmatic phrasing, conditional verbs, references to fire, empire, and cycles of decay. One passage read, "When the twin eagles fall, and silver rains upon the earth, then shall the west awaken, too late, to its own undoing." Scholars have debated the meaning since. Even earlier, in 1546, a monk named Giovanni Mercati claimed to have seen a codex in a private Florentine collection that matched ancient descriptions. It disappeared from record soon after. Was it a forgery, or something spirited away in the chaos of Italy's shifting political landscape? Perhaps most curiously, in 1943, during the Nazi occupation of Rome, German officers raided the Vatican archives. What they sought remains unknown, but an internal Vatican memorandum, dated October of that year, refers obliquely to a set of ancient pagan texts of predictive nature being removed from restricted storage. No official record of such documents exists today. Rumors persist among scholars of a sealed room deep beneath the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, holding scrolls deemed too dangerous or heretical for public release. In a 1972 letter, obtained from the archives of the Jesuit historian Wilhelm Schultz, there is a cryptic reference to a Book of Shadows believed by Schultz to be a surviving Sibylline fragment smuggled into Austria after the war. He wrote, "It speaks in riddles of mountains that burn, and oceans that empty their bellies, of men without faces, and days that last no longer than a breath. If it is authentic, it was never meant to be read. It was meant to be endured. The letter ends abruptly, with no record of what became of the so-called book. Occasionally, strange references appear in private estate inventories from pre-revolutionary France and Victorian England, items listed as unattributed prophetic manuscripts, origin unknown, often accompanied by Latin annotations in marginalia. Most are dismissed as apocrypha or elaborate forgeries, but a few have vanished before proper study could be completed. One, believed to have belonged to Charles Townshend, bore a line in Greek that roughly translates as, "He who rules without sacrifice invites the hour of ash." So what happened to the Sibylline books? Were they truly incinerated by the wrath of Jupiter on that stormy night in 83 BCE? Or was the fire a cover for a quiet erasure, either by political enemies, radical religious reformers, or those who feared what the books might reveal? And if a fragment does survive hidden in a monastery, a private library, or beneath layers of Vatican bureaucracy, what would it say? What crisis, what empire, what reckoning would it foresee? The Sibylline books may have vanished, but their shadow still lingers over the long memory of Rome. The lost books of the Sibyls, voices buried by empire. Long before Rome's legions trampled the edges of the known world, before the Gospels were inked and cathedrals raised, there were voices shaking, urgent voices that emerged from caves, temples, and open fields. They spoke in riddles, in verse, in fragments that pierced through time. These were the Sibyls, women not of myth, but of history, seers, oracles. Their words carried the weight of fate. Their warnings whispered through incense smoke and carved into scrolls that emperors consulted with reverence and fear. The Sibylline books were not folklore. They were once among Rome's most guarded treasures. Their origin, like so much of antiquity, is shrouded in story. A woman appeared before Tarquinius Superbus, Rome's last king, holding 9 volumes of prophecy. When he refused her price, she burned 3. When he refused again, she burned 3 more. Finally, she sold him the remaining 3 at full cost. Those final volumes were placed beneath the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus and entrusted to the Quindecimviri Sacris Faciendis, Rome's priestly custodians of divine revelation. These texts were consulted only in times of dire crisis during plague, famine, or foreign threat. The Sibylline books did not offer clear answers. They offered cryptic verse, riddles veiled in metaphor. Yet their impact was unmistakable. When the Senate decreed new temples, introduced foreign gods, or ordered unfamiliar rites, it was often at the Sibyl's suggestion. Cybele, the great mother of Anatolia, entered Rome through their guidance. So did Apollo. These weren't ornamental additions. These were tectonic shifts in Roman religious identity. And yet, of the thousands of lines they once held, almost nothing survives. In 83 BCE, the temple that housed the Sibylline books was consumed by fire. Rome mourned. The loss was more than material. It was a fracture in the Republic's connection to something older, stranger. In a hurried response, emissaries were sent across the Mediterranean to gather oracles and prophetic texts, hoping to reconstruct what had been lost. Fragments were collected, reordered, and locked away. But by the 4th century CE, even this reconstructed collection had vanished. The rise of Christianity saw the Sibyls reframed. Church fathers like Lactantius and Augustine quoted Sibylline verses they believed foretold Christ. Yet the books themselves became liabilities pagan relics in a newly Christian empire. By imperial order, they were destroyed. but not all traces vanished. In a 10th century Byzantine codex, a marginal note describes a black sibyl whose verses were hidden beneath a temple raised by fire. A Carolingian manuscript mentions forbidden books buried beneath Rome, where the Tiber once shifted its course. These aren't confirmations, they are echoes, hints that someone, somewhere, thought the words too dangerous to destroy, too sacred to leave unguarded. Who were the Sibyls? Really, they were not one voice, but many. Cumaean, Delphic, Libyan, Erythraean. Women who spoke from trance, whose bodies trembled as divine utterance passed through them. They weren't queens, they were vessels. They answered to no hierarchy, no doctrine. That alone made them threatening. To the Romans, they were useful. To the early church, they were problematic. A woman claiming divine insight outside of temple or scripture posed a challenge no theology could easily contain. Perhaps that is why the books were burned. Not because they were pagan, but because they were independent, unaligned, oracular authority without priest or empire behind it. The Sibyl did not predict what rulers wanted to hear. She offered warning, often unwelcome, and her prophecies were known to spark fear. Lactantius quotes a Sibyl who foresaw a fire that would consume the corrupt. Origen cites a prophecy of a son born without seed, who shall wear the crown of stars. These lines are ambiguous, poetic yet unsettling. Were they glimpses of genuine mystical insight, or inconvenient truths wrapped in verse? Some scholars now suggest the Sibylline books may have contained more than religious prophecy. They may have encoded historical cycles, astronomical patterns, even veiled political critique. If true, then their destruction wasn't just religious censorship, it was information control. Knowledge dismantled because it could not be contained, and yet fragments linger. Michelangelo painted 5 Sibyls on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, giving them parity with Hebrew prophets. In his time, the Sibyls had already passed from fact into symboliate. Their presence persisted. Their mouths, frozen mid-speech, seemed caught in the act of revelation, something unfinished. A 13th century Florentine treatise on dreams includes a curious quote, "Beware the silence that follows the storm, for it speaks louder than thunder. When the golden lion weeps, the black sun shall rise." The line is simply labeled, Ex Sibylla, no context, no source, just a voice surfacing through the layers. Scattered rumors suggest more. A Jesuit archive in Malta once catalogued a bundle marked Sibylla Cumana, later reported missing during the Napoleonic Wars. In Constantinople, a 17th century traveler spoke of purchasing verses from a priestess of the West. The scroll was never seen again. We don't know if these were authentic or invention, but even forged voices suggest something deeper, that the world has never stopped listening for the Sibyl. Modern scholars continue to search. In obscure codices, in medieval glosses, in anomalous meter hidden within larger works. Some hope to identify cadence and form, to reconstruct even a fraction of what once was. Others believe the Sibylline tradition was never about preservation, it was about emergence, that the Sibyl's voice is not a fixed text, but a recurrence, a haunting, because what makes the Sibyl dangerous is not her prophecy, it's her refusal to be silenced. She exists outside of doctrine, outside of ownership. Her verses, once spoken, belong to no one. And that is precisely why they threaten those in power. Even today, within the vast archives of the Vatican, whispers persist of a sealed container marked, not by name, but by symbol hidden deep within restricted shelves. No confirmation, no evidence, only rumor. But rumor is often the last shelter of forbidden truth. The Sibylline books may never be found, but the question they pose remains. What if prophecy once came not from priest or pulpit, but from women, alone in the wild, eyes wide, with something too vast to explain? And what if those voices cut down, burned, erased still linger, not in ink, but in echo, not in scripture, but in the cracks between the stories we choose to tell? To this day, the Sibyl haunts the margins, a figure not of closure, but of rupture, a reminder that there were once voices beyond the control of temple or crown, and perhaps there still are. The Library of Ivan the Terrible, a Tsar's vanished treasure. In the heart of Moscow, beneath centuries of stone, there is said to lie a chamber that no one can find, a vault untouched by time, buried beneath the towers and cathedrals of the Kremlin, not sealed with gold, not filled with relics, but something far more dangerous: knowledge, forbidden, ancient, and unspeakably powerful. This is the legend of the Library of Ivan the Terrible, vanished collection that has haunted scholars, rulers, and treasure seekers for over 5 centuries. They call it the Liberia, a name derived from liber Latin for book. But there is nothing liberating about its story. If it ever existed, it was not merely a royal archive. It was a repository of forgotten empires, smuggled manuscripts, and texts said to predate the fall of Byzantium. Works pulled from Constantinople's doomed shelves, scrolls inked by vanished hands, rarities not seen in any other part of the world. The library, if real, may have held the intellectual wreckage of civilizations. At its center stands Ivan IV Vasilievich, the first Tsar of all Russia. Crowned in 1547, he was brilliant, ruthless, and unpredictable. A visionary, a reformer, a tyrant, Ivan was as much theologian as he was executioner. He founded the printing press in Russia and personally edited religious texts. He also led pogroms, orchestrated mass torture, and ruled through fear. But above all, Ivan the Terrible was obsessed with knowledge. And it's from this obsession that the Liberia begins to take shape. According to scattered traditions, Ivan acquired a collection of manuscripts from the fallen Byzantine Empire texts smuggled west during the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453. These were said to have passed through Lithuania before reaching Moscow. Ivan, understanding their power, secured them in a secret chamber, perhaps beneath the Kremlin itself, or hidden in catacombs under a monastery. Others say he moved them frequently, trusting no one, fearing both theft and revelation. Some accounts claim the books contain dangerous knowledge, apocryphal gospels, alchemical texts, lost pagan cosmologies. One version suggests his own orthodox advisors begged him to destroy them, fearing heresy. He refused. Instead, he hid them so well that even his successors could not retrieve them. The first known reference to the Liberia appears not in Ivan's time, but nearly 2 centuries later. In 1724, German scholar Johann Gottlieb Vock claimed to have found references to it in old Muscovite correspondence. He believed the books were stored in underground vaults beneath the Kremlin, but Vock died before publishing his findings. In the 1820s, Kondraty Rylaev, a Russian professor and poet, claimed to have found partial inventories of the Liberalists that included titles by Aristotle, Claudius Ptolemy, and even a lost treatise by Galen. He believed the texts were housed in a stone chamber sealed by Ivan himself. Rylaev searched. He found nothing. Still, the legend refused to fade. In 1898, historian Alexander Ivanov claimed to have deciphered coded entries in 16th century Russian chronicles, pointing to a vault beneath the Cathedral of the Archangel. He petitioned the Tsar for permission to excavate. It was denied. Official Russia, it seemed, had no interest in unearthing a past it couldn't control. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks took a different view. Lenin is rumored to have approved covert digs beneath the Kremlin. Documents describing these efforts have disappeared into sealed archives. Some whispers claim that passages were discovered and then resealed. Others that excavations were redirected away from certain areas by anonymous orders. Even the KGB is said to have chased the Liberia. Declassified memos from the 1960s describe agents tracking manuscripts believed to have originated in Ivan's collection. Their trail led through Poland, Turkey, and Romania. Nothing was confirmed. Nothing ever is. What makes the myth endure is its remarkable consistency. Across centuries and ideologies, the core elements remain unchanged. A secret chamber, ancient books, buried beneath the seat of Russian power. There are no authenticated manuscripts, no artifacts officially linked to the library, and yet the story grows. The most sustained search came from Russian archaeologist Ignatius Stiletsky in the early 20th century. He devoted more than 30 years to the Liberia. Stiletsky believed the entrance lay beneath the Ivan the Great bell tower. Between 1911 and 1914, he secured limited access to excavate. His journals speak of bricked passages and subterranean corridors of spaces that seemed to end abruptly or had been deliberately sealed. World War I halted his work. The revolution buried it. Stiletsky never gave up. Until his death in 1949, he insisted the state was hiding what he had nearly found. His notes riddled with maps, obsessive marginalia, and accounts of encounters with Orthodox monks suggest he believed he had come within meters of the chamber. Other theories diverge. Some believe Ivan moved the library to the Solovetsky Monastery in Russia's north, a cold, remote place surrounded by water and stone, its interior labyrinthine. Others think the collection was scattered, smuggled into Orthodox strongholds across Russia. But the most haunting idea is that the Liberia was never simply a library, that it was a cache of forbidden science. A vault of arcane truths, alchemical formulae, Gnostic scriptures, texts not meant to be read by ordinary men. In one declassified KGB report from 1957, an anonymous source refers to the Liberia as the key to forbidden sciences. Another quote, attributed to a monk from Mount Athos in 1938, warns of books of fire destined for the Red Crown. Were they speaking of Ivanor, of something still to come? Some physical traces may have surfaced. In 1975, a private collector in Belgrade claimed to own a codex bearing the Cyrillic inscription. From the chamber beneath the crown, the manuscript was a partial Latin version of a lost work by Proclus. Its paper and ink matched 15th century standards. The day before scholars were to examine it, it disappeared. In 1991, a Moscow bookseller advertised a bundle of early theological tracts from the hidden court. He vanished within weeks. The listing was pulled. No record remains. If real, these fragments suggest not loss, but dispersal. That the Liberia was broken apart, smuggled out, protected, or censored. Russian literature carries the echoes. In Dostoevsky's Demons, Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, and Gogol's unfinished epics there, are references to hidden truths, secret rooms, lost documents. Whether consciously or not, these stories tap into a national mythos of buried memory, of knowledge once held and deliberately suppressed. Modern technology offers new tools. In the 2010s, researchers proposed scanning Kremlin substructures using ground-penetrating radar. The proposal was denied, but leaked data hinted at anomalies, rectangular voids, architectural inconsistencies buried beneath the bell tower and Cathedral of the Annunciation. No further exploration was allowed. Perhaps the silence is bureaucratic, or perhaps it's something else. What would it mean to uncover a lost archive filled with foreign philosophies, ancient wisdoms, and suppressed cosmologies beneath the symbolic heart of Russia? Perhaps the truth is more elusive still. Maybe the library never rested in a single chamber. Maybe it moved, passed through generations in secrecy, hidden in the walls of monasteries, sewn into bindings, carried in whispers, or perhaps most chilling of it, was read, and then destroyed, read by those who understood its meaning, who decided the knowledge was too potent, too destabilizing to exist, who consigned it to ash, not out of ignorance, but recognition. Still, the story persists. Each decade brings a new rumor, a new manuscript, a new silence. The Orthodox Church declines to comment. The Kremlin remains unmoved. But beneath the streets of Moscow, beneath layers of power and stone, something waits. Perhaps not a room, perhaps not even books, but the idea, the possibility, too sacred to erase, a Tsar's treasure, not of gold but of forbidden thought. Not every book is meant to be read, some are meant to be remembered. The Voynich manuscript, a codex without a key. In a locked vault at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Manuscript Library sits a book that should not exist. Bound in limp vellum and filled with more than 200 pages of cryptic script and unclassifiable illustrations, this singular artifact has confounded linguists, cryptographers, mystics, and computer scientists for over a century. It has no confirmed author, no known origin, and no decipherable meaning. Yet, against all odds, it endures, resisting comprehension, resisting dismissal. It is known as the Voynich manuscript, named after Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish-American rare book dealer who stumbled upon it in 1912 while examining a chest of forgotten volumes in a Jesuit library in Italy. At once, Voynich knew he had found something extraordinary. The book's script flowed with the elegance of a real language, looping, legible, but utterly unfamiliar. Every page seemed designed with intent. Intricate botanical drawings, astrological diagrams, and clusters of nude women bathing in green orbs of liquid. The language, is soon dubbed Voynikazi, has defied all attempts at interpretation. Codebreakers from both world wars tried and failed. Alan Turing reportedly glanced at it, unconvinced. In more recent times, researchers have turned to machine learning. A team at the University of Alberta in 2016 fed the text into neural networks, hoping to match its syntax to natural languages. The algorithm suggested Hebrew, others argued for Latin, some proposed Proto-Romance dialects. All theories fell apart under closer scrutiny. What is most confounding is that Voynikazi behaves like a real language. Statistical analysis confirms that its word frequency follows Zipf's Lawa mathematical property shared by all natural human languages. This consistency casts doubt on the idea that the manuscript is a hoax. If nonsense, it is structured nonsense of incredible sophistication. The manuscript itself seems to be divided into sections. The first is botanical, filled with illustrations of unknown plants, many seemingly inspired by nature, but none found in any known herbarium. Their roots twist into impossible shapes, leaves spiral in unnatural forms. Some drawings faintly echo medieval herbal guides, but most appear born of an entirely different imagination. Then there are the astronomical charts. Stars, moons, concentric circles. Some constellations are familiar, but most are symbolic, untethered to any known celestial map. The next section is biological or anatomical. Here, human figures dominate naked women immersed in what appear to be pools of water or some unknown fluid, linked by tubes and conduits. They interact with spherical vessels, gesture towards stars, and sometimes seem to float mid-air. No two figures are exactly alike. And then, at the manuscript's core, lies page after page of dense text-long passages of uninterrupted Voynichese script, punctuated by the occasional star-like glyph or strange emblem. Some scholars have interpreted the bathing women as symbols of transformation, ritual healing, perhaps. Others argue for alchemical significance. Still more propose that the entire manuscript is a coded pharmacological manual. In 2017, computational linguists posited that repeated phrase structures might correlate with medieval medicinal recipes. But if that were true, why the elaborate secrecy? Why encrypt healing knowledge in a cipher that no one, not even its contemporaries, could read? One compelling theory is that the Voynich manuscript is a constructed, Languagian, invented script, perhaps the private creation of a single individual. If so, it would explain both the internal coherence and total external opacity. It may have served as a devotional act or a private encyclopedia, known only to its creator. In this view, the manuscript becomes a closed system, not meant to be read by others, but to contain knowledge or experiences that could not be expressed any other way. Another theory is more radical. Perhaps the manuscript was never meant to be read at all. Perhaps it was created as a kind of meditative object, a visual prayer, a psychological map, a sacred text whose purpose was not communication, but contemplation. In this sense, the mystery itself is the point. In the 17th century, the manuscript surfaced in the hands of Georg Baresch, a Bohemian alchemist. Unable to understand it, Baresch sent pages to Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar, obsessed with deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. Kircher, convinced the script held profound meaning, failed to decode it. After Baresch's death, the manuscript disappeared again, eventually resurfacing centuries later in the Jesuit archives from which Voynich purchased it. Carbon dating in 2009 confirmed the vellum dates between 1404 and 1438. The ink and pigments are consistent with 15th century materials. No signs of forgery have been found. And yet, there is no trace of the manuscript's existence during its first 200 years. No references, no marginalia, no signs it was ever read. The manuscript has been linked, however, tentatively to various traditions. Some see echoes of Cathar mysticism. Others detect astrological influences from the Islamic Golden Age. A 2020 paper suggested certain diagrams overlay with ancient Mesopotamian star charts. Critics dismissed the claims, but the theory sparked renewed interest in the manuscript's possible links to lost knowledge systems. What makes the Voynich manuscript so haunting is its silence. There are no side notes, no corrections, no explanations. Unlike most medieval books, it appears untouched, revered, or perhaps feared. It has the stillness of a sealed monologue, as though its author wrote for no reader but themselves or something greater. Some suggest that the manuscript was used as a mnemonic device tool to trigger oral knowledge shared among a select few. If true, its text might not contain meaning in itself, but instead prompt it through recitation or ritual. This would explain why its structure mimics language while eluding all interpretation. We are listening for a voice never meant to speak without guidance. Throughout its history, the manuscript has passed through the hands of alchemists, emperors, Jesuits, collectors, and codebreakers. None have broken its silence, and yet it remains strangely intact and stolen, undamaged, immune to time and fire, as if the very act of its indecipherability protected it. There are those who claim to have cracked it in private deciphered fragments or translated pages. But none of these claims have withstood academic review. The problem lies not only in the script, but in the lack of any parallel text. A Rosetta Stone needs two knowns. The Voynich has none. It is not surprising that the manuscript has inspired obsession. Online forums debate its origins daily. Artists replicate its illustrations. Poets allude to its mysteries. It has appeared in novels, operas, and video games. It has become not just an object of curiosity, but a symbol, a monument to the unknown. What if the real secret of the Voynich manuscript is that it has no message? That it is a riddle with no answer? Or perhaps, more profoundly, that the manuscript is the Anserto, a question we no longer remember how to ask. Perhaps this is why it persists, folded in silence, behind glass and stone, in the quiet heart of a modern library. A book that stares back, a challenge to meaning itself. Not everything was made to be known. Some things were made to be wondered, and still it waits, for the right eyes, for the right moment, or for no one at all. The Book of Soiga, John Dee, and the Cipher of the Dead. In the shadowed corridors of Tudor England, a man of unmatched intellect stood at the edge of science and sorcery. John Dee, mathematician, astronomer, advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, more than a court scholar, he was obsessed with the universe's hidden structure. To Dee, the cosmos was a grand language waiting to be decoded, and no manuscript haunted him more than a strange, ciphered book, the Book of Soiga. According to Dee's diaries, it arrived as if by fate, perhaps gifted, perhaps summoned, perhaps found in a dusty private library. It looked like any other Renaissance grimoire, worn leather, cracked spine, yellowed vellum. But inside, it was different. Much of the book was readable treatises on astrology, angelic invocations, and alchemical lore. But near the end, Dee found something else. 6 pages filled with dense letter grids, 49 tables of Latin characters arranged in precise mathematical format. No headings, no instructions, just lines of ciphered letters that defied even Dee's encyclopedic mind. He tried rotations, numerology, gematria. He consulted his crystal. He prayed. The code did not yield. In the winter of 1582, Dee summoned Edward Kelly, a scryer reputed to speak with spirits through a polished obsidian mirror. Dee believed divine knowledge could be accessed, but only through angelic intermediaries. He recorded their sessions meticulously in his spiritual diaries. One entry has haunted historians for centuries. During a session, Dee asked the archangel Uriel about the Book of Soiga. The response was chilling. Uriel claimed the book had been revealed to Adam in paradise before the fall, that only the archangels knew its meaning, and that no living man could understand it without divine aid. Still, Dee persisted. He believed the tables held a key to what he never said. Some speculate it was a map of divine creation, others, a ritual to cross the veil of death. His obsession deepened. His home became a temple, his mirrors portals, his mind unraveled. Then the manuscript vanished. Not stolen, not sold, lost to time, like many of Dee's possessions, scattered during his exile, or hidden by those who feared what he had uncovered. For centuries, the Book of Soiga was considered a myth. But in 1994, the silence broke. Deborah Harkness, a historian of science, found a cryptic reference while researching Renaissance magic. A wider search followed, and soon, 2 copies of the Book of Soiga surfaced quietly shelved in the British Library and the Bodleian Library in Oxford, both titled Alderaya Siv Soiga Vokor. The rediscovery electrified scholars, but the mystery deepened. Much of the text contained familiar occult Loriangel names, Kabbalistic diagrams, planetary rituals, but the final pages retained the same 49 letter tables. The cipher remained. No key, just symbols daring the reader to try again. Cryptographers tried to solve it. Some thought it was a substitution cipher. Others said it was a sacred code, not meant to be broken. A divine language, still cloaked in silence. In 2006, Jim Reeds, a mathematician at AT&T Labs, made progress. Using computational tools, he discovered the tables were generated by a recursive algorithm, astonishing insight for a 16th century manuscript. Each table needed a unique Latin seed word. Dee may have known Thema, believed he did. Even so, their purpose remained opaque. They weren't spells or maps. Patterns existed, but the meaning stayed elusive. A mystical engine? A mirror of the soul? No one could say. Dee believed the Book of Soiga linked Earth to the angelic realm. Its ciphered pages held a structure too complex to be accidental, too deliberate to be decorative. After his encounters with the book, Dee's fortunes faded. He lost royal favor, his library was looted, his manuscripts scattered, his name dimmed, but Soiga remained. In his final journals, he lamented one thing. What do the tables mean? It is easy to romanticize Soigas, a relic, a bridge between realms. But those who've studied it speak not of revelation but disorientation. The tables induce vertigo linguistic spirals with no exit. One researcher described it as a language that knows it's being watched. Another dreamt in its patterns waking breathless. Whether dramatized or not, the psychological effect is hard to ignore. It behaves like a puzzle that resists being solved. Each attempt deepens the mystery, and yet the pull remains. Why? Perhaps Soiga is a mirror, not of intellect but of motive. Why pursue what cannot be possessed? Why read a book written, perhaps, for angels? There are Whispers fringe stories. A copy smuggled into Prague by a Rosicrucian sect. A version encoded into music by a Baroque composer. Claims that its tables influenced early machine translation during World War II. But as Soiga's legend grows, so does the uncertainty. The rediscovered copies remain locked in rare book rooms. No scans of the ciphered pages exist, only transcriptions. Curators speak of preservation, but some whisper of something else. Concern. One anonymous curator recounted a troubling case. A scholar spent months on Soiga's cipher, then vanished. In his office, a notebook filled with Soiga-like grids. On the final page, they are watching. Anecdotes, perhaps, but Soiga is not alone. Other occult books, the Voynich manuscript, the Grand Grimoire, share this fingerprint. Obsession, then silence, as if each page turned demands a toll. What remains isn't just the puzzle of the cipher, but of its persistence. Why did Dee care so deeply? Why did the book re-emerge when it did? Why do we still feel drawn to it? Some believe Soiga is unfinished by design. A ritual, not a record. Its tables are not for reading, but for experiencing. A map to shift perception. Others think the cipher has been solved, just not by those who speak. That within the recursion lies memory, a code that knows its readers, a text that dreams. Whether these ideas spring from truth or mysticism, Soiga continues to stir minds across disciplines. Occultists, coders, theologians, linguists, each approaches it from a new angle, yet none leave unchanged. And in its refusal to close, it becomes more than a mystery. It becomes a presence, eternal, not because it was found, but because it never stopped speaking. Watching, waiting. The Ripley Scrolls, alchemy's impossible map. In the dim vaults of British cathedrals and the climate-controlled archives of European libraries, there exists a document so peculiar it defies category. Known as the Ripley Scrolls, these long, illuminated manuscripts stretch several feet in length and shimmer with gold, vermilion, and ink-black script. Each scroll is a visual Ridley medieval tapestry of dragons, kings, suns and moons, glass vessels, cryptic rhymes, and crowned toads floating in flame. Their purpose is elusive: to illustrate, in metaphor and mystery, the path to the philosopher's stone. The scrolls are attributed to Sir George Ripley, a 15th century English canon and alchemist whose name became synonymous with the Hermetic arts. Ripley's life, like his work, is shrouded in ambiguity. He claimed to have studied alchemy in Rome under a mysterious figure named Master Ereberinus, and later wrote of travels through the Middle East. His writings speak of divine revelation, secret laboratories, and the transformation not just of base metals, but of the soul itself. Roughly 20 known examples of the Ripley Scrolls survive, each one slightly different, yet unmistakably linked by symbolism. They are not books. They are scrollsome, stretching nearly 20 feet, designed to be unrolled gradually, revealing secrets not in sequence, but through a layering of imagery and verse. Their illustrations verge on the surreal. Green lions devouring the sun, kneeling monks presenting flasks to angels, crowned serpents merging in alchemical vessels. Few artifacts in Western esotericism match their density of allegory. What's most arresting is the scroll's symbolic code. Alchemical texts often conceal meaning in poetic language, but these scrolls layer visual metaphor as an additional cipher. The crowned toad, for instance, appears again and again, sometimes weeping, sometimes aflame. In alchemical lore, the toad represents the corrupt prima materiae, foul, earthly substance from which the philosopher's stone is birthed. When crowned, it signals the beginning of its transmutation. Grotesque matter elevated to kingly potential. Scattered throughout are verses, densely rhymed and cryptic. One oft-repeated couplet reads, "Calcinate the black with fire hot, till it be brown and blue like a peacock's tail." This isn't chemistry, it's coded myth. The peacock's tail refers to a stage in transmutation when the matter iridesces briefly, an ephemeral shimmer that signals inner change. To modern readers, it borders on nonsense. But some scholars argue these images and rhymes are mnemonic devices, visual spells, meant to embed processes not in conscious memory, but in intuitive recognition. They bypass logic. The scrolls don't instruct, they initiate. A symbolic hallucination encoded as a training tool. The authorship remains debated. While Ripley's name appears in most scrolls, there is no proof he created the originals. Some believe they arose from an alchemical circle active in 16th century England mystics, who preserved sacred knowledge through ambiguity. By masking secrets in art, they transmitted teachings without inviting persecution and misuse. In 1605, one version of the scroll passed into the hands of Elias Ashmole, a mystic, collector, and future founder of the Ashmolean Museum. Ashmole claimed that Ripley had once transmuted lead into gold and donated the fortune to the Knights of Malta. Whether apocryphal or not, Ashmole's reverence led him to collect and annotate the scrolls obsessively. To him, they were not metaphor, they were scripture. The imagery intensifies as the scroll unfolds. A naked king steps into a bath shaped like an egg, flames licking its edges. Nearby, twin figures sewn red, one white wrestle inside a sealed globe. These are not scenes from folklore. They are visual summaries of the alchemical stages. Mortificatio, separatio, coniunctio. Death, division, union. The soul rendered, purified, and made whole again. While modern chemistry finds no empirical process here, that may be beside the point. Alchemy was never purely physical, it was spiritual ambition rendered through symbolic form. The scrolls' grotesqueries and crowned beasts reflect psychological torment, not laboratory protocol. They are maps of interior transformation disguised as external science. And yet, there are details too consistent to dismiss. The vessels depicted alembics, retorts, furnaces match historical tools used in 15th century alchemical labs. The inscriptions, often in Latin, echo phrasing found in other contemporary treatises. This is not a fantasy world. It is a hybrid document, part ritual, part manual. Some scrolls show evidence of deliberate gaps. Blank spaces where imagery halts, as though pausing for the reader. In a few, these voids appear in crucial symbolic sequences, suggesting that something was withheld or lost. Other versions were clearly defaced. Burned patches, scraped pigment, overwritten text. Whether these were acts of censorship or misunderstanding, no one can say. In 2017, researchers at Yale's Beinecke Library scanned one Ripley scroll at ultra-high resolution. Beneath layers of paint, they found ghostly underdrawing Sealy drafts, redrawn poses, erased creatures. It wasn't spontaneous vision, it was a process. Crafted, reconsidered, reworked. A deliberate act for a mysterious audience. Collectors today covet the scrolls not for instruction, but for presence. They exude intention, too structured to be delusion, too abstract to be transparent. They live in a liminal category, neither art nor science, neither scripture nor nonsense. A manuscript that behaves like a labyrinth. No two scrolls are identical. Each reshapes motifs, adds or removes figures, alters verse. Some show an extra toad, or a missing king, or a reversed angel. This variation seems purposeful, like layers of a spell spoken in different dialects. Each copy becomes a private puzzle, slightly misaligned with the next. The truth, if it exists, lies in the tension between versions. One theory proposes that the scrolls were initiation tools, that their unrolling mirrored ritual progression. The adept moves down the scroll as he moves through stages of transformation, encountering symbols not as lessons but as thresholds. The crowned serpent is not to be understood, it is to be passed. Some fringe historians believe the scrolls point to a lost ritual lineagia visual liturgy preserved from a forgotten mystical sect, perhaps Cathar or Templar in origin. Others insist it's entirely English Hermeticism, flowering in the twilight of the medieval world, when mysticism and empiricism still touched fingers in the dark. The scrolls have also left an artistic legacy. Surrealists like Max Ernst drew direct inspiration from their structure. Modern alchemical illustrators borrow their palette and density. In online forums, diagrams from the Ripley scrolls are dissected not just by occultists, but by data theorists and semioticians. What keeps the scrolls alive is not their age, but their ambiguity, a mystery preserved not in secrecy, but in excess. They say too much, they contradict, they mislead, and that, paradoxically, is what keeps people returning. Each eye that scans the dragon, the toad, the sun, and the flame sees something slightly different. Each scroll is a mirror, each symbol a lens. Somewhere among the crowned beasts and burning kings, a single phrase often appears sparsely erased, almost hidden. Here lieth the secret, not the answer, not the method, just the whisper of a destination. And so, they wait, in drawers and glass cases, in collections public and private, coiled tight like serpents asleep, waiting to be unfurled by hands that may never understand them. Each time the scroll is opened, it begins again. The toad cries, the fire turns blue, the egg cracks, the king weeps, and the reader, perhaps unknowingly, steps into the circle, not to reach the end but to follow, not to solve but to witness. Here lieth the secret, the Devil's Bible, the forbidden giant of Bohemia. It is the largest medieval manuscript ever discovered, bound in wood, wrapped in leather, and stretching over 3 feet long, weighing nearly 165 pounds. It is so large that legend claims it was made from the skins of 160 donkeys. But its infamy does not come from its size, it stems from what lives within its pages. A single drawing, towering, stark, smiling, a full-page portrait of the devil, horns curled, claws outstretched, locked forever in a bestial pose. This is the Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. The story of the Codex Gigas begins in the early 13th century in the Benedictine monastery of Podlais, a remote abbey in the kingdom of Bohemia, the Czech Republic. According to monastic legend, a monk committed a grave transgression. His punishment was to be entombed alive. In a desperate plea, he vowed to create a book containing all earthly knowledge in a single night. The abbot agreed. As the night wore on and hope faded, the monk turned not to God, but to the devil. In exchange for his soul, the monk completed the manuscript. At dawn, the book was done, and nestled within it was a grotesque homage to its creator, a life-sized image of Satan, painted in eternal celebration. The manuscript is real and breathtaking. Composed of 310 parchment leaves, it contains the entire Latin Bible, flanked by a vast collection of texts on medicine, exorcism, astronomy, penitence, and folklore. It is a book of contradictions, holy scripture beside occult formulae. Each page is illuminated with red, blue, and gold. The calligraphy is so uniform, it appears to be the work of a single handjet over such an enormous span of content. that consistency is difficult to fathom. There are no known errors or corrections, no marginalia, no signatures. The work appears perfect. Scholars are baffled. Could one person really have written this entire book? Over decades, perhaps. But some believe he was not alone. Others whisper darker possibilities. The infamous portrait of the devil sits on folio 290R. It occupies the entire page-horned, taloned, squat. Across from it lies a diagram of the heavenly city. Salvation faces damnation. The design is deliberate, a moral confrontation captured in ink. The codex has passed through many hands. It survived fire, war, theft. In 1648, it was taken from Prague by Swedish troops during the 30 Years' War and brought to Stockholm, where it resides in the National Library of Sweden. Its origin, however, remains obscured. No records explain why it was made or for whom. The layout is precise. The pages feature mirrored themes: scripture, then incantation, medicine, then magic. The margins are clean, the symmetry meticulous. Why would a holy text include references to demonic possession and magical rituals? Why would a Bible advise on fever treatments and bloodletting? The codex refuses to fit within a single genre. It is as much a medical journal as it is a grimoire, as much a Bible as it is a mystery. Sections of the manuscript narrow, the spacing shrinks, as though the writer's urgency increased, yet the style never changes. There is no visible fatigue, no sloppiness. Paleographers cannot explain it. Was the scribe highly trained? Was he inhumanly precise? Some theorize the writing was aided, if not by other monks, then by something else. Anomalies persist. One page shows signs of tearing and repair. Another bears a faded fingerprint near the devil's page. The final sections contain gaps, blank spaces, suggesting missing leaves. Some say these pages were removed because they held dangerous knowledge. Others suspect theft, or worse, that they were never meant to be read. Within the codex lies a chronicle of Bohemian history. Lists of kings, saints, and local legends lend it the quality of a national record. It is a time capsule of human fear and ambition. It merges science, faith, superstition. It spans plague and prophecy. It is a map of its age, but also of ours. Legends say the codex whispers. Monks reportedly heard faint voices from it. Visitors standing before the devil's portrait report dizziness, chills, even nightmares. Symbols repeat in their dreams. Some feel watched. The manuscript is not just read, it is experienced. For centuries, the codex was hidden. Scholars accessed it rarely and under heavy supervision. Today, digital scans allow for study, but the original is still handled with near reverence. Some say the precautions are for preservation. Others suggest something else, that touching it is dangerous. There is an unmistakable psychological weight to the Codex Gigas. It is massive, yes, but also mentally destabilizing. Its combination of sacred and profane, of God and devil, scripture and spell feels unresolved. It does not offer clarity, it demands confrontation. One theory is that the Codex was meant to be a survival guide, a master document for enduring catastrophe. It contains scripture for the soul, medicine for the body, magic for unseen threats. It was a lifeboat for a collapsing world, but if its purpose was salvation, why is it so heavy with dread? Another theory sees the book as containment, that it was made not to share, but to trap. That the image of the devil is not art, it is a seal, a protective measure, a binding spell disguised as scripture. The blank margins around him are not design, they are isolation. The book is oddly resilient. The parchment has barely aged. The ink is vibrant. Some believe the materials were chosen for supernatural endurance, not to preserve the book but to preserve what it holds. In 2005, researchers used spectral imaging to analyze the codex. They found signs of erased writing, vanished text beneath visible pages, nothing readable yet. But the idea lingers. The book is hiding more. Theories abound. It's been called a grimoire, a political commission, a forgery, a warning, a relic of divine madness. But none explain its contradictions. None resolve its central question: why was it made? Some believe it was not made for people at all, that the book is a ritual object meant not to be read but witnessed, that the image of the devil is not a warning but an invitation, a portal painted in ink. Modern interpretations lean toward psychology. They say the codex is projection of guilt, faith, ambition, that it was written by someone losing his mind under divine pressure, that it reflects inner torment, prayer turned into paranoia, a manuscript as mirror. Still, people flock to see it. They stand before the devil's page. They look and the devil looks back, not with malice, with recognition, as if he knows why they came. What does it mean that this book, this monument of human effort, centers itself not on Christ but the adversary? What does it mean that its scribe is anonymous, its purpose unknown, its power undimmed? The Codex Gigas has no answers. It simply endures. It outlived the abbey that birthed it. It passed through fires and wars. It survived because it was too strange to destroy. And in its center, one image remains. The devil, eternal, watching, waiting. The devil's Bible does not explain itself. It only remembers that you came. The Book of the Xian, the Tibetan text that shouldn't exist. It is said to be older than Sanskrit, older than the Vedas, older than memory itself. A book whispered about in the shadowed halls of esoteric societies, yet never seen by modern eyes. The Book of the Xian. Its name surfaces rarely, like a ripple on deep water, mentioned only in footnotes, seance transcripts, and the private correspondences of occult philosophers. According to its few advocates, it was not written in any known language. It was received. The world first learned of the Book of the Xian in the late 19th century, through the writings of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the controversial founder of the Theosophical Society. In her monumental 1888 work The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky claimed that the text formed the basis of all ancient wisdom traditions, primordial scripture inscribed in Senzar, a language unknown to any academic lexicon. She did not discover the book, she said. She remembered it. Blavatsky described the Book of the Xian as a series of stanza-scriptic verses that narrate the creation of the cosmos, the descent of consciousness into matter, and the cycles of human evolution. The style is spare, symbolic, and unnerving. The first stanza begins not with a god or a word, but with the void. The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever-invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. It is not a story, it is a cosmological code. According to Blavatsky, the Book of the Xian was stored in a secret Himalayan monastery, guarded by adepts of a hidden brotherhood. These Mahatmas, as she called them, were not mystical abstractions. They were real, she insisted. She even named them Master Moria, Master Kuthumi. Through telepathic communication, and astral travel, she received passages of the Jian directly from them. Skeptics immediately denounced her claims. Philologists dismissed the language of Senzar as imaginary. No scholar had seen the Book of the Jian, no catalogue recorded it, and no monastery could confirm its existence. Yet Blavatsky stood firm. She said that the book was not meant for conventional scrutiny. It was part of the occult canon knowledge, deliberately hidden from materialist minds. And yet, traces of something do exist. The stanzas Blavatsky published do not resemble any known scripture. They are dense with symbols, yet curiously mathematical in their structure. Some researchers have noted parallels with Tibetan Dzogchen texts and certain early tantras, but none confirm a direct link. Others point to similarities with the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, or even with Sumerian creation hymns. The fragments echo across traditions, but they are never identical. One of the most curious aspects of the Xian is its resistance to context. The text, as presented by Blavatsky, does not follow narrative arcs. Instead, it describes conditions of being. Its stanzas read like transmissions from another order of reality. Darkness radiates light, and light drops one solitary ray into the waters, into the mother deep. These are not metaphors easily unpacked. They behave like linguistic sigils. For decades, the Book of the Xian was treated as a footnote in Western esoterican invention at worst, a visionary poem at best. But in the 20th century, certain anomalies revived its mystery. In the 1940s, a British intelligence officer named W.Y. Evans Wentz, who had studied Tibetan Buddhism extensively, noted eerie resonances between Blavatsky's verses and secret transmissions he had received from Tibetan lamas. He stopped short of claiming a direct connection, but he hinted that some lamas considered the Jian stanzas to be legitimate. More curious still is the case of Nicholas Roerich, the Russian painter and mystic who journeyed through Tibet in the 1920s and 30s. Roerich claimed to have encountered monks who knew of a book older than all others, kept in a subterranean sanctuary beneath the Himalayas. He spoke cryptically of Shambhala, of ancient texts written in a script not of this earth. In private writings, he referred to a book that matches Blavatsky's description and hinted that fragments of it were hidden in his own artwork. There are modern rumors as well. In 1984, an anonymous document circulated among European occult circles, so-called partial translation of a stanza allegedly found in a sealed vault in the eastern Himalayas. The language was arcane, but the structure mirrored Blavatsky's stanzas, a cosmology not of matter, but of vibration and light. The document vanished as quickly as it appeared. To this day, no scholar has located a physical copy of the Book of the Xian, but its influence runs quietly through 20th century metaphysics. Carl Jung, though skeptical of theosophy, reportedly kept a copy of the secret doctrine in his personal library. The Swiss alchemist Carl Gustav Jung spoke of archetypes that mirror the Jian's motifs: the cosmic egg, the mother abyss, the serpent of cycles. Whether Jung knew the Jian by name is unclear, but his writings trace its silhouette. Digital age researchers have turned to pattern recognition and stylometry, hoping to trace the stanza's linguistic DNA. Some have argued that the syntax mimics Vedic Sanskrit filtered through German Romanticism. Others believe Blavatsky may have accessed untranslated Tibetan texts brought to Russia in the 19th century, texts now lost or locked away. But these remain theories, unable to confirm or deny the origin of the verses. And so, the Book of the Xian endures as an anomaly, either authenticated nor disproved, neither scripture nor forgery. It lives in the cracks of history, a presence more than a proof. Whether it was written by ascended masters, channeled from the void, or born from Blavatsky's imagination, the text has done what many verified scriptures fail to do. It provokes awe. To read the stanzas is to enter a state of dislocation. They are not meant to be understood in a linear fashion. They unfold like mantras, collapsing ordinary distinctions between symbol and meaning. Perhaps the Book of the Dzyan was never meant to be a book. Perhaps it is a mirrorone that reflects not what is, but what watches. And if the book does exist, if somewhere in the cold stone depths of a Himalayan monastery, its pages still rest then, it remains what it has always been, hidden, not lost. A text that should not exist, and yet, somehow, still does. The Grand Grimoire, the Black Book of Demonic Summoning. In the flickering candlelit corners of Renaissance Europe, there were whispers soft, urgent, and forbidden. Whispers of a book, bound in black leather, sealed in secrecy. Known only as the Grand Grimoire, it was said to contain instructions not just for summoning spirits but for commanding demons. Some say it emerged in the 16th century. Others insist it is far older, a relic whispered of since the time of Solomon. Either way, the Grand Grimoire is regarded as one of the most dangerous and controversial magical texts ever written. Its reputation begins with its contents, precise rituals for summoning Lucifer himself and invoking his infernal court. The book is divided into two distinct parts. The first outlines rituals and incantations. The second lists demonic hierarchies and the means to bind them. But unlike other grimoires that veil their knowledge in allegory or mysticism, the Grand Grimoire is disturbingly direct. It reads less like scripture and more like a manual. Cold, methodical, intentional. According to lore, the original Grand Grimoire was found in the tomb of King Solomon who, according to myth, once commanded legions of demons to build his temple. This claim is likely apocryphal, but it connects the book to ancient roots. Most historians place its origin in 16th century France, where it circulated among alchemists, mystics, and renegade scholars. Its alleged author, Alibek the Egyptian, is more ghost than man. No records confirm his existence, yet his name clings to the manuscript like smoke. The earliest surviving copies are written in Latin and bear the subtitle Le Dragon Rouge, the Red Dragon. One version discovered in the 19th century was said to be covered in warnings. Do not read aloud. Do not perform the rites. Do not stare at the symbols for too long. Margins were filled with frantic handwriting, circles, crosses, untranslated glyphs, as though the scribes themselves were terrified of what they transcribed. The book's centerpiece is the ritual known as the Pact. The instructions are alarmingly specific. Procure a wand made of wild hazel, a virgin parchment, the blood of a black rooster, and incense of storax and myrrh. Perform the rite on a Tuesday during a waxing moon. Draw a magic circle. Trace a triangle. Recite the invocation 3 times. Do not break the gaze of the entity you summon. Do not step beyond the circle. One misstep and you are unprotected. This ritual is said to summon Lucifuge Rofocael, the Prime Minister of Hell. The Grand Grimoire does not approach him with fear. It addresses him like a negotiator. Terms are laid out. Services requested. Power, knowledge, riches all at a cost. That cost is left ambiguous. Unlike most magical texts of the era, which mask their meanings in complex symbolism, the Grand Grimoire is brutally clear. Its spells are direct, its demands absolute. Scholars believe it was not intended for idle curiosity, but for active use, likely by cunning folk, those who worked magic for hire, on the edge of towns and tolerance. By the 18th century, copies of the Grand Grimoire had spread through secret societies. The Hellfire Club in England was rumoured to own one, and French occultists treated it as an authentic artifact. In 1843, a defrocked priest named Honorius, writing under the pseudonym Antoine the Kabbalist, published a translation. He claimed the rituals worked. He hinted he had seen them used. He warned of consequences. What those consequences were, he never said. Through the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Grand Grimoire's legend deepened. Some collectors who acquired rare editions died suddenly, strokes, suicides, disappearances. One vanished from his locked study. Only the book and a scorched circle of salt remained. Others claimed the book called to them, that its symbols stirred in dreams, that its presence lingered in the mind long after being closed. Academic institutions were cautious. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France holds a partial facsimile, but the original manuscript, if it exists, as under restricted access. The Vatican's secret archive is rumored to possess a copy, but no proof has surfaced. Private collectors whisper of complete editions passed hand to hand, each adding more annotations. No two copies are exactly alike. Some scholars dismiss the Grand Grimoire as Gothic Theatera hoax dressed in parchment. Others argue it's a composite, pulling rituals from Jewish mysticism, Greco-Roman magic, and medieval demonology. But a few insist there is something more, something older. One researcher, Vittorio Merlo, compared its ritual structure to Mesopotamian demon-trapping bowls. He found linguistic echoes in Sumerian incantations. His work was dismissed until a fire consumed his home in 1989. The manuscript he was working on was never recovered. Those who study the book today often do so in isolation. One academic described it as spiritual contagion, not because it spreads physically, but because it infects intention. The more one engages with it, the more the symbols embed themselves. Dreams blur, time distorts. Scholars report migraines, auditory hallucinations, and waking visions. Some claim the book is not just read but reads you back. The Grand Grimoire presents itself not as theory, but as access. It is not reverent, it does not preach, it gives instructions. Cold, stark, clear. There is no moral guidance, no warnings of spiritual peril. It assumes the reader is already lost or willing to be. It is also, crucially, incomplete. While several translated versions exist, each omits different pieces. Diagrams are missing. Symbols are misaligned. Rites are half-rendered. Some theorists believe this is intentional, that the complete Grand Grimoire has never been published, that each version is a fragment, that the whole exists only in whispers, passed between those who understand the true cost of reading it. A few fringe theories suggest that the Grand Grimoire is not a product of its time but a transmission, a text dictated, not authored, that it was given, not created, and that its purpose is not to summon demons but to awaken something latent, a consciousness, a knowing. In Prague, a vault beneath a former Jesuit chapel holds wall carvings that mimic symbols found in the Grand Grimoire. They bear no explanation. Their age is unknown. Visitors report an uncanny sensation while standing inside, a feeling of alignment, of being observed. Perhaps that is the true power of the Grand Grimoire, not what it contains, but what it initiates. A challenge to authority, a fracture in belief, a contract not of blood, but of attention. To read the Grand Grimoire is to engage with a forbidden architecture, to consider that language itself might unlock something deeper, and once unlocked, cannot be closed. Whether fact or legend, forgery or revelation, the Grand Grimoire endures, not because it is verified but because it is feared. A shadow manuscript, a book that should not exist, and yet it does. The Grand Grimoire does not ask for belief. It asks only that you open it, and once you do, it never truly closes again. Liber Linteus. The mummy-wrapped manuscript. In 1848, in a quiet antique shop nestled in Zagreb, Croatia, a peculiar acquisition stirred the curiosity of scholars and collectors alike. An Egyptian mummy, already a rare and valuable specimen, arrived, but it wasn't the body that caused a stir, it was what covered it. Instead of traditional linen bandages adorned with hieroglyphs or protective amulets, this mummy was wrapped in line after line of carefully inked text. The letters weren't Egyptian, and the language wasn't one any Egyptologist could recognize. For decades, it remained a mystery. What no one realized at first was that this mummy was wrapped in the only known surviving book written in Etruscan language, nearly lost to time. It would come to be called the Liber Linteus, Linen Book. And its very existence defies conventional historical understanding. The cloth, when fully unrolled, measures over 12 feet in length and is divided into 12 columns of neat, deliberate script. Some of the columns have been damaged or lost entirely, but enough survives to offer a tantalizing glimpse into the rituals and beliefs of a long-vanished culture. The format strongly suggests liturgical intent, perhaps a prayer manual or a calendar of rites meant to be performed aloud. But its path from sacred scroll to funerary wrapping is something no scholar has convincingly explained. The Liber Linteus likely originated in the 3rd century BCE during the waning years of Etruscan civilization in what is now central Italy. Its creators were part of a culture already being absorbed by Rome. Somehow through war, trade, or theft, the manuscript ended up in Ptolemaic Egypt, where it was eventually repurposed as mummy wrappings for a middle-aged woman. The reasons are unclear. Was it the cloth itself that was valuable, or did its sacred text carry meaning even across languages? The woman's identity is unknown. Her burial was modest, with few indicators of status, and yet the linen that bound her body was inscribed with what may be the last surviving full-length Etruscan manuscript. She vanished into history, but the text wrapped around her endured. The mummy changed hands several times before arriving in Vienna, then ultimately to the Archaeological Museum in Zagreb. There it lay, largely ignored, until Mahajlo Bari, a Croatian librarian, noted something peculiar about the text. Unlike Egyptian or Greek, the script bore striking similarities to inscriptions found on Etruscan tombs and votive offerings. Slowly, painstakingly, scholars began to identify it as Etruscan. Etruscan is a linguistic enigma. It is not Indo-European, sharing no significant roots with Latin or Greek. The structure is unlike anything in classical Europe, and nearly all known examples are typically funerary epitaphs or dedicatory phrases. The Liber Linteus, by contrast, is expansive, containing over 1,200 words. yet its meaning remains frustratingly opaque. Written right to left in a consistent hand, the text suggests ritual precision. Some phrases repeat with a rhythm that implies incantation or formal recitation. Names of deities appear: Tinia, the sky god, and possibly Uni, the goddess of marriage. The word Sakni is thought to refer to priests or celebrants. Scholars have proposed that the scroll outlines a religious calendara record of offerings and rites scheduled throughout the year. Yet without a complete understanding of Etruscan grammar, this remains speculative. Preservation of the scroll borders are miraculous. Linen is delicate, and ancient ink easily fades. But mummification sealed the manuscript away from light, moisture, and pests. The ink, composed of carbon black and plant dyes, remained legible. The cloth absorbed the rituals it described, and then the embalming resin sealed it in time. Modern technology has pushed the boundaries of what can be known. Infrared scanning and spectral analysis have revealed faded passages and suggested corrections where the ink bled or the linen folded. Some researchers believe hidden sequences lie within the spacing and structure of the text, possibly encoding astronomical or calendrical information. One speculative theory posits that the folds themselves form a kind of cosmic chart. More controversial still are esoteric interpretations. In the 20th century, fringe researchers claimed the Liber Linteus to be a kind of initiatory texta manual for spiritual transformation encoded in forgotten symbolism. Some went further, suggesting that the repeated phrases create linguistic rhythms intended to induce altered states of consciousness, or that the scroll was used in rites involving guided dreaming or death simulation. Such ideas are dismissed by mainstream scholars, yet they persist in occult circles. Fragments of possible meaning continue to emerge. Comparative linguistics has allowed tentative translations of key terms and proper names. Scholars believe one passage outlines a purification rite. Another may describe sacrificial offerings. But without a Rosetta Stone, full comprehension remains elusive. Translation efforts are slow, reliant on cross-referencing with funerary stelae and archaeological context. The scroll is not displayed in its entirety. To unroll it would risk irreversible damage. Instead, portions are kept under glass in Zagreb, while high-resolution digital scans are used by researchers worldwide. What remains folded may yet contain critical information lines of text that could unlock the whole. But the price of opening it fully might be its destruction. There's something haunting about the way the text survives, not in a temple, nor buried in a library, but wrapped around a forgotten body. The dead woman, anonymous, became the vessel through which a dying language preserved its final whisper. The scroll speaks, but only in fragments. A broken voice repeating sacred syllables no one can understand. Unlike other ancient texts rediscovered through deliberate excavation, the Liber Linteus was found by accident. It wasn't saved by intent, but by indifference. The people who cut the manuscript into strips likely didn't know what it was. In destroying it, they preserved it. The story of the Liber Linteus is a story of layers. Literal layers of cloth, of ink, of resin, but also metaphorical layers of language, culture, time. Each layer obscures and protects. Each layer deepens the mystery. It remains one of the most enigmatic texts in the ancient world, not because it is magical or cursed, but because it is silent. It sits just beyond reach, deciphered only in fragments, comprehended only in theory. a book that offers no uncertainly presence. And yet, its presence is powerful. It tells us what is lost, what might still be hidden, what slips through the cracks of empire and time. It tells us that language is fragile, and that meaning, once forgotten, is nearly impossible to retrieve. It tells us that books do not always survive on shelves. Sometimes they survive in silence, wrapped around a forgotten body, ink pressed against the dark, waiting. The Picatrix, the most dangerous book of astrology. In the dim-lit libraries of medieval Europe, tucked between dusty shelves of sanctioned theology and the safer branches of natural philosophy, there existed a book that scholars whispered about more than they quoted. Its pages spoke not of salvation, but of dominion, not of heavenly piety, but of harnessing the heavens. Known in its original Arabic as Gyat al-Akm, the goal of the wise, and later translated into Latin as the Picatrix, this was not merely a book. It was a blueprint for altering reality. The Picatrix is vast and arcane, a labyrinth of magic, astrology, alchemy, cosmology, and philosophical speculation. Most scholars trace its origin to 10th or 11th century Al-Andalus, in the intellectual heart of Islamic Spain. Some attribute it to the Andalusian scholar Maslama al-Majriti, though the true authorship remains debated. The name attached to its Latin version appears centuries later, around 1256, when it was translated under the commission of Alfonso X of Castile. What emerged was a text that would ripple through the undercurrents of Western occultism for centuries to come. Composed of 4 books and thousands of lines, the Picatrix is not a work of organized instruction. It is chaotic, dense, and often contradictory. But this, perhaps, is its true nature. Its form mirrors its function, to train the mind not in rote learning, but in arcane thinking. It offers detailed rituals, from the crafting of talismans to planetary invocations, from mirror scrying to dream manipulation. Many rituals are grotesque, requiring blood, exotic herbs, and celestial timing down to the minute. One describes the preparation of an amulet using animal entrails bathed under Mars's influence. Another calls for sleeping with a gem under one's tongue while reciting planetary prayers to achieve astral projection. The Picatrix does not aim to passively describe the stars. It seeks to weaponize them. It instructs its reader to synchronize actions with cosmic rhythms to create effects in the terrestrial world by manipulating the celestial. To cure disease, induce love, provoke dreams, bind enemies, uncover secrets. It is a book not of passive observation but of active interference. The stars are not distant fires, they are instruments. But beneath its catalogue of spells lies something deeper, a worldview. The Picatrix marries Hermetic mysticism with Neoplatonic philosophy. It posits that all things in the material world are shadows of higher, celestial forms. The image of a lion carved into stone is not just art, it is a magical conduit to Mars. Plants, metals, colors, and animals are all indexed to planets. Time is not linear, but a shifting mechanism of windows and alignments. To act at the right moment with the right symbol and word is to pull a lever in the machine of reality. Because of its ambitions, the Picatrix has always stood at the edge of orthodoxy. Renaissance thinkers like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola engaged with its ideas carefully, if not directly. Ficino's theory of spiritus, the cosmic spirit, that links all beings bears uncanny resemblance to the Picatrix's conception of universal sympathy. But open acknowledgement was rare. The Church frowned upon books that promoted knowledge through personal will rather than divine revelation. Indeed, what made the Picatrix dangerous was not that it courted demons, but that it empowered individuals. It offered a path to understanding and shaping the universe without need for priest, king, or church. In a society where access to knowledge was tightly controlled, the Picatrix was radical. It implied that reality was a code, and that it could be rewritten. The Latin translation spread quietly. It appeared in scattered manuscripts, hand-copied by alchemists, astrologers, and esoteric scholars. It was cited in hushed tones, cross-referenced in notebooks that bore no author. The Picatrix was never printed during the Renaissance, nor officially endorsed. It survived on the periphery, feared, admired, preserved. Among the most haunting passages is one describing a ritual to contact planetary spirits through sleep. The practitioner is instructed to craft a circle under the correct moon phase, ingest a potion made of opium, mandrake, and honey, and recite a planetary hymn until dreams open into revelation. This is not allegory. The text insists on its precision. Misalignment means failure worse. Other instructions are esoteric to the point of obscurity. A ritual for wealth requires the burning of 7 ingredients under the fixed star Aldebaran. Another suggests the use of a child's breath to seal a talisman of influence. Whether these were ever practiced as written is unknown, but the Picatrix makes no apology for their inclusion. In the modern era, the book experienced a quiet revival. Translations began to emerge in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Portions were rendered into English and studied by scholars of esoterica. Yet even now, many full translations remain locked behind academic presses or passed between practitioners. The Latin and Arabic versions differ subtly, revealing a text that has never fully stabilized. Contemporary occultists draw heavily from the Picatrix. Its planetary magic underpins parts of modern ceremonial ritual. Some chaos magicians reference its structures when building personalized magical systems. Others see it as a philosophical manual, rather than a spellbooker lens through which to see the world as fluid, symbolic, and interconnected. Speculative theories continue to surround it. Some believe its timing algorithms influenced early astronomical tables. Others claim fragments of it informed the magical worldview of John Dee, though no direct citation exists. One fringe theory suggests that the Picatrix encoded mathematical principles that anticipate chaos theory, its understanding of resonance, correspondence, and non-linear causality far ahead of its time. The Picatrix resists easy classification. It is neither purely astrological nor purely magical. It is metaphysics wrapped in ritual, science steeped in sorcery. It does not instruct the reader to worship but to act. Its morality is ambiguous. It warns of consequences but does not forbid action. It does not guide toward good or evil, only toward effectiveness. Perhaps that is why it unnerves. In a world increasingly fixated on data and control, the Picatrix offers a different power. Not the mastery of information, but the resonance of will. It suggests that understanding the deep structures of the cosmos is not a matter of faith, but of craft. Even today, the Picatrix is not widely taught, not easily found. Its survival feels deliberate, carefully copied, cautiously preserved. To open its pages is to cross a threshold into a world where stars speak, herbs remember, and images burn with significance. A world where the universe can be reshaped not through prayer, but through precision. In the quiet rooms of rare libraries, and among flickering screens in hidden forums, the Picatrix still moves, still teaches, still tempts, not with promises of heaven, but with the knowledge to bring heaven down. It endures not because it is understood, but because it still works for those who dare to learn its language. The Book of Enoch, the banned biblical text, long before church councils convened to sift orthodoxy from heresy, before the familiar canon of Scripture was etched into permanence, there existed a text revered alongside Genesis, Isaiah, and the Psalms. A book that claimed to unveil celestial architectures, recount ancient angelic rebellions, and peer beyond the veils of death itself. It was known simply as the Book of Enoch, sacred volume, in early Jewish and Christian circles. And then, just as mysteriously, it vanished. Tradition attributes the book to Enoch, seventh from Adam and great-grandfather to Noah, man described in Genesis as having walked with God until he was taken, not by death, but by divine ascension. But the Enoch of this text is no rustic patriarch. He is a prophet of cosmic law, a witness to heavenly trials, and the scribal custodian of forbidden knowledge. Composed between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE, the Book of Enoch was likely written in stages by multiple authors over time. Its language, Jezan, ancient Semitic tongue, still used liturgically in Ethiopia, preserved it in isolation for centuries. In the West, it disappeared almost entirely. It wasn't until 1773 that Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Abyssinia bearing 3 handwritten copies. What he revealed would ripple through biblical scholarship and ignite controversy. The text itself is sprawling. Not a single book, but a constellation of visions. The Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. Together, they form a universe of divine order and divine punishment, and at the center stands a myth rarely told. The tale of the Watchers. The Watchers were angels appointed to watch over humankind, but they fell, seduced by human women and corrupted by desire. Their union gave rise to the Nephilim, giant offspring who devoured all the earth's resources and turned to violence. These fallen angels also taught humanity secrets they were never meant to know: metalwork, cosmetics, astrology, sorcery. What had once been divine guardianship became contamination. Heaven's order fractured. God sends Enoch, not to destroy them, but to document. Enoch ascends to celestial realms, where he witnesses the judgment of the Watchers, the binding of their leader Azazel, and the apocalypse that will cleanse the earth. He walks through chambers of stars, the treasuries of snow and hail, and past the tree of life. He records not just visions, but measurements, not allegories, but architecture. He becomes a celestial cartographer. In this cosmology, evil does not originate with Adam's disobedience, but with angelic rebellion. It is not the serpent, but Azazel who brings corruption. This, for early theologians, posed a doctrinal dilemma. The Book of Enoch threatened to rewire the entire narrative structure of Genesis. More dangerously, it suggested that knowledge, especially celestial knowledge, was both power and peril. Small wonder the book was excised. By the 4th century CE, it had all but vanished from Christian theology outside of Ethiopia. It was never included in the Jewish Tanakh. It was labeled heretical, apocryphal, dangerous. And yet, shadows of Enoch persisted. Fragments in Aramaic surfaced in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, validating that the text had once circulated widely. These scrolls, dated as early as the 2nd century BCE, contained entire portions of the Book of the Watchers, demonstrating that Enoch was not marginal, but central to the religious imagination of Second Temple Judaism. The New Testament bears its fingerprints. The Epistle of Jude quotes Enoch directly. "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment on all." The Book of Revelation echoes Enoch's fiery vision of divine reckoning. Even Jesus' apocalyptic teachings seem to mirror Enoch's warnings of cosmic upheaval. Despite its absence from official canon, the Book of Enoch remained an underground current. In mystical Judaism, Enoch evolved into Metatron, the highest of angels, seated at the right hand of God. In Christian esoterica, he became the model for ascension, wisdom gained through revelation. The prophet who wrote what angels spoke. The book became an artifact of hidden knowledge, too powerful to ignore, too dangerous to embrace. Its astronomical book is a striking example of this tension. Enoch is shown celestial mechanics in painstaking detail. Solar calendars, lunar phases, the shifting of seasons. These aren't poetic metaphors, they are frameworks for interpreting the structure of time. Enoch's education is ritualized. He is initiated, he is transformed. In esoteric traditions, this depiction of Enoch as divine scribe inspired generations of mystics, alchemists, and visionaries. To write, in the Enochian tradition, is to resist chaos. To fix symbols upon the page is to guard against forgetting. Names in Enoch are sacred acts. The naming of stars, the cataloguing of angels, even the recording of sin becomes a liturgy of memory. Azazel is chained in a desert cleft. The Nephilim are drowned by the flood. The Watchers are cast from grace. Yet none of this erases what they brought. The knowledge remains, passed down through bloodlines, etched into language, encoded into texts, hidden in caves, and under monastic care. The Book of Enoch insists that some wisdom comes at great cost. That cost is echoed in the book's own history. For nearly 15 centuries, it was known only by rumor in Europe. Early church fathers like Tertullian referenced it, even defended its authority. But institutional Christianity turned away. It was too wild, too speculative, too foreign. Yet in Ethiopia, it was canon, not apocrypha, but scripture. It was copied by hand, read in liturgy, and preserved as part of the sacred order. When Western scholars finally revisited Enoch, they did so cautiously. The first English translation appeared in 1821. Subsequent editions were often partial, heavily footnoted, and accompanied by warnings. Yet fascination grew. Scholars found in Enoch a missing link between prophecy and apocalypse, between Jewish mysticism and Christian theology. The Book of Enoch refuses simplification. It is neither myth nor doctrine, but a synthesis. It envisions a cosmos of justice so absolute, it becomes terrifying. A universe where angels fall but never die, where humans are taught secrets not to elevate but to test. It whispers that knowledge has weight, that understanding carries judgment. To read Enoch is to enter a landscape not of parables, but of machinery. Stars move with intent. Angels govern realms. The wind has a treasury. The sea has doors. The world is not abstract. It is engraved. Even now, Enoch resists full acceptance. Modern editions abound, but its mysteries remain intact. It is studied by historians of religion, theologians, and occult practitioners alike. Some view it as an echo of a pre-flood memory. Others see it as early science fiction. Still others hear, in its layered voices, a warning meant for a generation yet to come. What is certain is this: the Book of Enoch was not lost by accident. It was set aside because it could not be controlled, because it offered a cosmology too complex, a justice too severe, and a path to divine knowledge that sidestepped institution. And perhaps that is why it endures. Because like the prophet it names, the book was not meant to die but to be taken, preserved, and returned. A text that challenges not just belief, but the architecture of belief. A vision that continues to burn just beyond the edge of canon. It is not salvation it promises, but understanding, not comfort, but clarity, not hope, but witness, and still it waits. The Copper Scroll, Treasure Map, or Sacred Riddle. March 1952. In a cave above the parched cliffs of Qumran, near the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, a group of Bedouin shepherds stumbled upon something that would unsettle scholars for decades. It wasn't parchment, it wasn't papyrus, it was metal. A scroll, if one could call it, that made of copper, green with age, sealed tight, and utterly unlike anything else found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. It would become known as the Copper Scroll, and it would defy every expectation of what a sacred text could be. The scroll was brittle with corrosion, and so stiff it could not be unrolled. Scholars eventually had to slice it into segments to read its contents. And when they did, they found no prophecies, no psalms, no theological debates. Instead, they found a list, a stark, methodical list, 64 entries, each one pointing to a hidden stash of treasure. Not metaphorical treasure, not allegory. Real treasure, gold and silver, vessels and scrolls, described in painfully precise detail. In the cavity of the old washer's chamber on the third terrace, a copy of this document and 65 bars of gold. Another, in the salt pit that lies beneath the steps, 41 talents of silver. The scroll reads like an accountant's log, carved in metal, dispassionate, exacting, and utterly devoid of commentary. The total volume is staggering. Scholars estimate the metals described in the scroll would be worth billions of dollars today. More perplexing still, the Hebrew used in the Copper Scroll is not the same stylized form found in the other Qumran manuscripts. It is clipped, bureaucratic, impersonalist, though it belonged to a different world entirely. This difference ignited decades of speculation. Some believe the scroll is linked to the treasure of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, perhaps hidden away before the Roman siege of 70 CE. Others suggest it may reflect a separate priestly sect, perhaps the Zadokites operating independently from the Essenes, the sect most commonly associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Then there are those who believe the scroll was never meant to be found by accident, that it was part of a ritual or coded practice meant to preserve knowledge under threat of annihilation. After all, who carves a treasure map into copper unless they intend for it to survive centuries? One detail offers a haunting clue. The scroll mentions that a duplicate copy was hidden with the treasure itself. There is a copy of this writing buried under the ash in the cistern at the peristyle courtyard. No such copy has ever been recovered. But its mention hints at a deliberate plan of preservation, a network of secrets meant to be rediscovered only when the time was right. In the 1960s, scholar John Allegro launched expeditions to search for the hoards described in the scroll. He turned over stones in the Judean desert, followed the coordinates as best he could, but he found nothing. His efforts attracted media attention, but professional backlash. Critics mocked him, accused him of sensationalism. His career, in many ways, never recovered. Still, the myth persisted. Stories circulated of silent excavations, of missing artifacts appearing on the black market, of unofficial finds kept quiet by those unwilling to trigger international scrutiny. No verifiable evidence emerged. Yet the rumors refused to die. Why? Perhaps because the Copper Scroll doesn't read like a hoax. Its language is too precise, its tone too indifferent. It lacks the mythic flair of a forgery. It inventories rather than inspires. More than one scholar has noted the clinical tone. The scroll speaks with no emotion. It does not attempt to persuade or warn. It simply records. Like an ancient audit of memory, the Copper Scroll documents without comment. And in that silence, it becomes more than a list. It becomes a riddle. Some researchers have turned to mystical interpretations. They argue that the treasure may not be physical at all, that the locations refer to conceptual repositories of knowledge, of ritual, of celestial alignment, that the 64 sites correspond to a sacred geometry now forgotten, a temple blueprint mapped onto the landscape of an occupied land. Others point to the materials. Copper was not easy to work with. The act of etching a scroll into copper would have been painstaking, expensive, and deliberate. Parchment fades, metal survives. Whoever created this scroll wanted it to endure, and it has. The scroll now resides in the Jordan Museum in Amman. Visitors gaze at its fragmented plates, sliced and oxidized, encased in glass. It's no longer legible to the eye. The text has been transcribed, translated, debated, but never fully understood. The locations described remain unverified. The treasure remains unfound. And the question echoes, was this a genuine inventory of sacred treasure hidden in the last days of a collapsing world? Or was it something else's spiritual safeguard, an encoded litany, a blueprint not for excavation but for understanding? A few researchers have speculated that the scroll may have been part of a larger system, that perhaps a series of metal texts once existed, each corresponding to sacred duties or cosmic alignments. A metal canon, hidden not only from Rome but from time itself. This theory is supported by peculiar repetitions in the text. Certain phrases and weights appear again and again, as though forming a rhythm, a pattern. Some have even proposed that the scroll is musical, that its numbers and measures could correspond to ancient harmonic systems or even star maps. There is, of course, no proof, but the scroll invites that kind of thinking. One curious line near the end reads, "Under the eastern edge, buried in black stone, lies the seventh measure." Scholars argue over its meaning. What is the seventh measure? Is it a unit of weight? A sacred object? A metaphor? No one knows, and that may be the most enduring power of the Copper Scroll. Its refusal to explain, its cold voice, its inert metal. It doesn't preach, doesn't prophesy, it simply records. And in that, it feels older than scripture, older than belief. Today, academics, treasure hunters, and spiritual seekers alike return to its lines. They analyze the grammar, map the locations, speculate about context, but the scroll does not change. It waits, just as it did in the cave, beneath centuries of dust and stone, waiting to be read, waiting to be understood, or perhaps not. Perhaps the Copper Scroll was never meant to be solved. Perhaps its treasure lies not in what it points to, but in what it provokes. Wonder, mystery, The audacity to imagine that someone, somewhere, etched a list into copper, defying war, exile, and oblivion, so that one day someone might ask, what was so precious it had to be hidden this way? We still don't know, but we keep looking, and the scroll remains, silent, cut into strips, unclaimed, still watching. The Book of the Wars of the Lord, a lost chronicle of divine battles. It is mentioned only once, a single line, buried in the Old Testament's book of Numbers 21:14. Therefore it is said in the Book of the Wars of the Lord, Waheb in Sufa and the Wadis, the Arnon, and then nothing. No context, no title page, no account, just a sudden, cryptic reference to a book that we no longer possess. Like a ghost fragment sewn into the living text, the Book of the Wars of the Lord remains one of Scripture's most unsettling absent-ceaser glimpse into a story now sealed away by time. What was it? Who wrote it? And why has it vanished? Some biblical scholars argue that the Book of the Wars of the Lord was a military log, a raw chronicle of Yahweh's conquests as the Israelites wandered through deserts and danger, not myth, not theology, but battlefield history records of divine strikes and mortal victories, preserved in terse, matter-of-fact prose. Perhaps it was once kept beside the ark itself, a ledger of God's wrath and rescue. Others propose it was poetican early Israelite war epic, akin to Mesopotamian or Canaanite hymns, a cycle of songs passed down orally, capturing the rhythm of swords and storms, of chosen tribes moving through cursed lands. In this view, the phrase quoted in Numbers is not from a historical document, but from a chant, a line lifted from a now forgotten hymn frozen in liturgical time. That the text is referenced so casually in Numbers is telling. The audience is expected to know what it means. There is no explanation, no attribution, as if the Book of the Wars of the Lord had at one time circulated widely known to the scribes, prophets, and elders, a companion to the Torah's narratives, now orphaned by editorial pruning. And why was it left out? That question haunts the footnotes of scholars and mystics alike. Some point to evolving theology, that early portrayals of Yahweh as a storm god and warrior king were later sanded down into more abstract morality. A text filled with divine bloodshed may have felt too primal for the priestly redactors shaping post-exilic Judaism. Others suggest it simply disappeared, lost like countless ancient works to war, fire, or time. The word milhamot, warsis, not symbolic. In ancient Hebrew, it denotes real conflict. This was no allegory. The book likely detailed specific campaigns, ambushes in Moab, skirmishes near the Dead Sea, perhaps even names of fallen chieftains. Some posit that it may have included the first record of Joshua's conquests or Israel's clashes with Edom and Amalek. But the theories stretch further. A subset of scholars has speculated that the Book of the Wars of the Lord once contained supernatural accounts, rains of burning sulfur, the halting of celestial bodies, rivers turned to blood, that it was a log of miracles deployed as weapons, where gods might bend the elements themselves. If so, it may have bordered on forbidden knowledge, dangerous stories that blurred lines between history and magic. Fragments elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible reference similar lost texts. The Book of Jasher, the Acts of Solomon, the Chronicles of the Kings. Citations without surviving copies. Some think these works once formed a larger corpus of tribal annals, regional accounts, interwoven with divine encounters and political memory. The Bible, in this view, is a curated reduction of a once wider, stranger scripture. Medieval Jewish commentators puzzled over the Book of the Wars of the Lord. Rashi, writing in 11th century France, suggested it contained poetic descriptions of Israel's journey and God's wonders. Others disagreed, claiming it was a martial document, never meant for public liturgy. The Kabbalists whispered that it was a code book, a record not just of past battles, but of cosmic alignments, astrological charts of divine will, disguised as geography. Modern researchers have scoured the Levant for clues: inscriptions on basalt stelae, obscure lines carved in ruined sanctuaries. Even Assyrian tablets mentioning Hebrew tribal leaders have all been examined, but none offer definitive links to the lost book. What we know is mostly what we don't. In the 20th century, some speculative theologians began to link the lost text to apocryphal traditions, suggesting that versions of the Book of the Wars of the Lord survived, hidden in Ethiopian or Samaritan lore. One controversial theory posits that fragments may exist within Qumran's Dead Sea Scrolls, disguised beneath cryptic titles. To date, no proven match has surfaced. There are also darker ideas: that the book was deliberately destroyed, that it recounted failures, atrocities, or episodes of divine silence too uncomfortable for the developing monotheism of late Judaism, a God who sometimes did not intervene, or worse, one whose wrath harmed the innocent. What might have been in it? Names of ancient cities now dust, stories of commanders forgotten by both Israel and history, instructions for sanctifying battlefields, lists of curses shouted before combat. It might have included songs of mourning alongside victory chants, perhaps even ritual show to prepare the ark for war, or how to cleanse a camp after bloodshed. We do not know, and maybe we were never meant to. Its very title, The Book of the Wars of the Lord, invites unease. We are accustomed to associating Scripture with peace, salvation, and love. But here is a missing volume where God is the general and battle is his sermon. What kind of religion does that imply? What kind of deity? Some Christians in later centuries attempted to fill the void. Apocryphal tales emerged, visions of heavenly hosts, battles in the firmament, echoes of Revelation. But these were later inventions, shaped by theological needs, not historical memory. The original remains silent, and still, it persists in footnotes, in sermons, in the curiosity of those drawn to the Bible's gaps rather than its lines. It is a relic of a textual archaeology, reminding us that Scripture was not always a single story, but a contested territory, a battlefield in itself. Today, the Book of the Wars of the Lord is not read, it is imagined. Its single surviving line, embedded like a fossil in the Book of Numbers, is all we have. But that fossil hints at a skeleton, a larger body of stories buried beneath the canon. We may never recover it, but we feel its shape, and we sense perhaps why it was buried. A record too direct, too brutal, or too revealing. A book where God marched in armor, where prophets bled, where belief and violence were one. Others have looked beyond the texts to archaeology for clues. Could Waheb in Sufa or the Wadis of Arnon yield physical remnant shards of pottery, altars, weaponry that link to the unnamed battles? Excavations continue in Jordan and the Negev, seeking signs of these campaigns. But landscapes shift, names change. Memory, even when carved in stone, can erode. The phrase quoted in Numbers also haunts biblical linguists. Waheb in Sufa may itself be garbled, possibly the fragment of an older dialect or a scribal miscopy of an oral tradition. Scholars debate its placement. Some think it was a margin note mistakenly copied into the scripture. Others believe it's the only surviving piece of a longer citation now lost. In some esoteric traditions, especially within mystical Judaism, the Book of the Wars of the Lord has taken on symbolic power. It is not only the record of physical conflict, but of spiritual warfare, a celestial drama unfolding behind human history. In this view, the missing book is not lost, but hidden on purpose, to protect those who would read it, or perhaps to test those who seek it. This theory isn't new. Ancient Near Eastern texts often blurred the lines between history and myth, between gods and kings. If the Book of the Wars of the Lord followed suit, it may have contained visions, divine dreams, battles in heaven, signs in the stars. Not just a list of past events, but an unfolding pattern. Whatever it was, it waits beneath centuries of silence, beneath dogma and doubt. A missing text, a sacred echo, a war story written in the language of God and then forgotten by men. It reminds us that what we lose is often as powerful as what we preserve, and that in Scripture, as in war, absence leaves the deepest scars. Some books are written to be read, others to be hidden. The texts we've explored tonight, forgotten, forbidden, fragmented, resist easy answers. They are echoes from lost shelves, pages that whisper more in silence than in script. And still, they endure. Not because they are understood, but because they were never meant to be. What knowledge did we lose when these books vanished? What truths were buried beneath ink, fire, and fear? Perhaps some doors were closed for a reason. Perhaps others are waiting to be opened. If these mysteries moved you, stay with us. Subscribe for more journeys into the strange, the sacred, and the unsolved. Because here, the story is never really over.